If a stranger ever tells you not to put your child into a car, you listen first and ask questions later. The rain started just after 10 p.m., soft at first, barely visible against the glowing windows of the Loron Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while expensive laughter drifted through the restaurant like smoke. Waiters moved silently between white tablecloths. A piano played somewhere near the bar, and Emily Carter stood perfectly still beside table 14 with a silver coffee pot warming her trembling hands. She heard the sentence by accident. Two men near the service hallway. Dark suits, broad shoulders, one of them speaking low in Russian while pretending to check his phone. At midnight, the family disappears. Emily's breath caught, so suddenly it hurt. The coffee inside the pot rippled. Her eyes lifted slowly toward the reflection in the glass wall beside her. The men looked calm. Too calm. One wore leather gloves despite the warm dining room. The other kept touching the cuff of his watch every few seconds like he was counting down to something invisible. Emily lowered her eyes immediately. She had spent years teaching herself how to disappear in plain sight. How not to react. How not to let fear reach her face. But her pulse had already begun to race beneath the sleeve of her black uniform. Across the restaurant, Nathaniel Brooks stood from his private table near the fireplace. Even from a distance, people moved differently around him. Executives straightened their posture. Managers smiled too quickly. Nathaniel Brooks carried the kind of wealth that bent entire rooms without trying. 42 years old. Founder of Brooks Global Logistics. Billionaire. Ruthless negotiator. Famous for trusting numbers more than people. Tonight, though, he looked tired. Not weak. Just exhausted in the quiet way powerful men became when no one was watching. His ex-wife Claire adjusted the scarf around her neck while their 10-year-old daughter Sophie spun slowly beside the table, humming softly to the piano music. Sophie's white winter coat brushed against the marble floor as she turned. Emily noticed the child immediately because children rarely learned how to fake happiness correctly. Sophie still smiled with her entire face. Emily swallowed hard. Midnight. The family disappears. A server brushed past her carrying wine glasses. Emily. The floor manager whispered sharply. Table 6 still waiting on dessert. She nodded automatically, but her attention remained fixed on the two men near the hallway. One of them glanced toward Nathaniel's family. Just for half a second. Then he smiled faintly. Emily felt cold spread through her stomach. She knew that smile. Calm before action. Controlled anticipation. The kind of expression people wore when they believed everything was already decided. She turned quickly and carried the coffee pot toward Nathaniel's table before she could lose her nerve. More coffee, sir? Nathaniel barely looked up from the document in his hand. No, his voice was distracted. Claire offered Emily a polite smile. Sophie looked up curiously. Your earrings are pretty, the little girl said softly. Emily touched the small silver studs automatically. Thank you. Nathaniel signed another page without lifting his eyes. Emily hesitated. Her training screamed at her to walk away. Stay invisible. Don't interfere. People like Nathaniel Brooks didn't appreciate warnings from waitresses. But then Sophie laughed quietly at something her mother whispered, and Emily heard her younger brother's voice inside her memory, so clearly it almost stopped her breathing. She stepped closer. Sir. Nathaniel finally looked at her. Gray eyes. Sharp. Impatient. What is it? Emily kept her voice low. I think you should avoid using your SUV tonight. Silence. Claire blinked. Sophie stopped humming. Nathaniel stared at her for 2 long seconds before leaning back slightly in his chair. Excuse me. Emily forced herself not to look nervous. I overheard something near the hallway. It may be nothing, but I don't think your family should leave in that vehicle tonight. Nathaniel's expression hardened almost instantly. Not angry. Worse. Dismissive. You overheard something. Yes, sir. And now my family shouldn't use our car. Emily nodded once. The piano continued somewhere behind them. Rain tapped softly against the giant windows overlooking Park Avenue. Nathaniel folded the document in front of him carefully. Miss Carter. Miss Carter, he said evenly. Do you normally involve yourself in private security matters while serving coffee? Claire shifted uncomfortably. Emily ignored the humiliation creeping up her neck. No, sir. Then perhaps tonight shouldn't be the exception. Sophie looked between them quietly. Nathaniel stood, adjusting the sleeve of his tailored charcoal coat. I appreciate your concern, he added, though his tone suggested the opposite. But my security team is more than capable of handling my family's safety. Emily opened her mouth once more before stopping herself. The two men near the hallway were gone. Vanished so smoothly, she almost questioned whether they had been there at all. Nathaniel placed a hand gently on Sophie's shoulder. Come on, sweetheart. Claire offered Emily an apologetic look before following them toward the lobby elevators. Emily remained beside the table, frozen beside untouched coffee cups and melting candlelight. Her hands trembled harder now. Deep outside, thunder rolled above Manhattan, and somewhere beneath the sound of rain and piano music, Emily felt the terrible sensation that the night had already begun moving towards something she would not be able to stop. Emily stood motionless long after the Brooks family disappeared into the elevator lobby. The restaurant noise slowly returned around her. Glasses clinked again. Someone near the bar laughed too loudly. The piano continued playing soft jazz beneath the low golden lights, but none of it sounded real anymore. Her eyes searched the dining room carefully. The two Russian men were gone. Not at the bar. Not near the hallway. Gone completely. A cold feeling settled into her chest. Experienced people disappeared quietly. Amateur people lingered. Emily. Her manager's voice snapped sharply behind her. What are you doing standing there? She blinked once and turned quickly. Sorry. Richard frowned at the untouched coffee pot in her hand. Table 6 has been waiting 15 minutes for cheesecake. I know. Then move. Emily nodded immediately and forced her legs forward. Calm. Steady. Invisible. That had been her rule for 3 years now. She delivered desserts. Cleared plates. Smiled politely when businessmen ignored her name tag and called her sweetheart instead. She lived in a small studio apartment 12 blocks from the hotel and worked double shifts 6 days a week. To everyone around her, Emily Carter was forgettable by design. Quiet waitress. 29 years old. No family nearby. No past worth asking about. But some habits never truly died. As she passed the mirrored wine display near the kitchen entrance, her eyes automatically scanned reflections instead of direct angles. Exit points. Hands. Body posture. She hated that she still did that. Hated that her brain continued measuring danger even while carrying cheesecake slices through a luxury restaurant. A server brushed past her carrying champagne. You look pale, he whispered. Emily forced a smile. Long night. But the truth felt heavier than exhaustion. Because deep down, she already knew something was wrong. She felt it in the silence left behind by those men. She felt it in the careful wording of that sentence. The family disappears. Not hurt. Not attacked. Disappears. Professional language. Controlled language. Her stomach tightened. Near midnight, the rain grew harder. Thick streams of water slid down the enormous front windows of the hotel lobby while gusts of wind rattled the revolving doors. Most guests had already left for the evening. The dining room slowly emptied until only a few late tables remained beneath the dim chandelier light. Emily wiped down the espresso station with shaking hands while trying not to look toward the entrance every 30 seconds. She failed. You waiting for somebody? Asked Olivia, another waitress tying her coat beside the employee lockers. No, Olivia smiled knowingly anyway. You have looked at that door about 100 times. Emily laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Just tired. Olivia squeezed her shoulder gently before leaving into the storm outside. Emily remained alone near the service corridor for another minute. Then her eyes drifted toward the security monitors mounted above the manager's office. 6 camera feeds. Lobby. Garage entrance. Elevator bank. Front curb. She stared at the screen showing the underground parking area. A black SUV waited beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Nathaniel's vehicle. 2 security men stood beside it. Emily narrowed her eyes slightly. One of them adjusted his coat sleeve. Leather gloves. Her heartbeat slowed instantly. Not from calm. From recognition. Her body remembered before her mind fully processed it. She had seen those gloves before. Eastern European private contractors often used thin leather tactical gloves with reinforced seams hidden inside the fingers. Flexible enough for formal environments. Durable enough for field work. Emily felt her pulse pounding inside her throat now. No, she whispered under her breath. Richard stepped out of his office carrying paperwork. You still here? Emily pointed carefully toward the monitor. Those are not his regular security guards. Richard looked irritated already. Emily, I swear if this is about that billionaire family again, please look carefully. Richard sighed dramatically and glanced at the screen for less than 2 seconds. Looks like security guards to me. One of them is wearing an earpiece on the wrong side. Richard stared at her blankly. Emily continued quietly. Most executive protection agents keep their dominant side free for weapon access and environmental hearing. Richard crossed his arms. How exactly would a waitress know that? The question hit harder than she expected. Emily lowered her eyes immediately. I read a lot. Richard gave a short laugh. You are scaring yourself over nothing. Then he softened slightly. Go home, Emily. Get some sleep. He walked away before she could answer. Emily stared back at the monitor. One of the guards opened the rear passenger door for Claire and Sophie. Nathaniel appeared seconds later speaking on his phone. Sophie climbed inside first, clutching a small sketchbook against her chest. The leather-gloved guard glanced upward suddenly, directly toward the camera. Emily froze. Even through grainy security footage, she felt the weight of that stare. Calm, empty, watching. Then the screen flickered once from a lightning strike outside. When the image stabilized again, the man was smiling faintly. Emily's blood turned cold, because she recognized that expression too. People smiled like that when they believed nobody in the room could stop what was about to happen. The SUV began rolling slowly toward the garage exit. Emily dropped the towel from her hands and reached for her coat. The storm hit Emily the second she pushed through the employee exit behind the hotel kitchen. Rain slammed sideways across the alley hard enough to sting her face, while freezing wind whipped her dark hair loose from its clip almost instantly. Taxi lights blurred through the water-covered streets. Somewhere far above Manhattan, thunder rolled between skyscrapers like distant drums. Emily pulled her coat tighter and hurried toward her old gray Honda parked half a block away beside a loading dock. Her hands shook so badly, she dropped her keys twice before finally unlocking the door. Inside the car, the silence felt crushing. Her breathing sounded too loud. Her heartbeat even louder. She gripped the steering wheel and stared through the rain-covered windshield toward the glowing hotel garage exit ahead. You are wrong, she told herself. You are tired, paranoid, broken. But another voice answered immediately from somewhere deeper inside her mind. Then why did the guard smile at the camera? Emily closed her eyes briefly. For years she had fought to bury that instinct. The endless scanning, the pattern recognition, the constant awareness that danger rarely announced itself loudly. Real danger arrived politely, quietly, wearing expensive shoes and calm expressions. Her brother Daniel used to joke that Emily could walk into a crowded stadium and identify the one person carrying bad intentions within 60 seconds. Back then, she laughed about it. Back before Istanbul, before the phone call at 3 in the morning, before silence became something that haunted her instead of comforted her. A pair of headlights emerged from the underground garage ahead. The black SUV rolled slowly onto the wet street. Emily sat upright instantly. Nathaniel's vehicle turned left toward Lexington Avenue. Another dark sedan followed close behind. Security detail. Or at least it looked like one. Emily hesitated for only 2 seconds before starting her engine. The windshield wipers struggled against the heavy rain as she pulled into traffic several car lengths behind the convoy. Midnight glowed faintly across the dashboard clock. Every instinct inside her screamed to stop. Call the police. Go home. Forget this family. Forget the billionaire who dismissed her like background noise. But Sophie's face kept returning to her mind. The little girl smiling shyly beside candlelight. The sketchbook in her arms. The innocent trust children carried without realizing how fragile the world could become overnight. Emily tightened her grip on the wheel and stayed behind them. Midtown traffic had nearly vanished because of the storm. Water pooled along curbs while steam rose from subway vents beneath flashing streetlights. Nathaniel's SUV moved steadily downtown toward the Queensboro Bridge entrance. Emily frowned slightly. That route made no sense. If the Brooks family was heading home to the Upper East Side, they should have turned north 10 blocks ago. Her pulse quickened again. The second sedan remained directly behind the SUV, maintaining exact distance despite changing traffic lights. Professional spacing. Too precise. Emily leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing through the rain. Then she saw it. The driver of the second vehicle flashed headlights twice. Short. Short. Pause. Another flash. Her blood turned cold immediately. Signal communication. Old field coordination pattern. No, she whispered. The SUV accelerated slightly toward the bridge ramp. Emily's mind raced. Think. Observe. Do not panic. Her phone sat in the cup holder beside her. She grabbed it quickly and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The line rang once, twice, then connected. 911. What is your emergency? Emily swallowed hard while keeping her eyes locked on the vehicles ahead. I think a family is being followed by fake security agents near the Queensboro Bridge. Ma'am, can you describe the situation? Black SUV. 2 male suspects. Possible organized operation. Did you witness a crime? Emily hesitated. The operator's tone changed immediately. More cautious now. More distant. Ma'am. No. Emily admitted quietly. Not yet. Silence crackled briefly through the line. Units are responding slowly due to weather conditions. If there is no active threat, please do not pursue the vehicles yourself. Emily almost laughed at the irony of that sentence. Do not pursue. Her entire life had once depended on pursuing danger before it became visible to everyone else. The convoy entered the lower bridge access road. Rain hammered violently against the metal framework overhead, while East River water churned black beneath the storm. Traffic thinned further until only a few scattered headlights remained ahead. Then Emily noticed something else. The SUV drifted slightly within its lane. Not dramatic. Subtle. Almost unnoticeable. But wrong. The vehicle was slowing. Come on, she whispered. The second sedan suddenly accelerated. Fast. Too fast. It pulled alongside the SUV for 3 seconds before dropping back again. Signal confirmation. Emily's heartbeat thundered painfully now. And then she heard it. Faint through her cracked window. Music. A distant classical melody drifting from one of the vehicles ahead. Russian orchestral music. Emily's hands tightened so hard around the wheel her knuckles turned white. She knew that song. Not because she loved classical music. Because she had heard it once before through surveillance headphones during an extraction operation years ago. The music had been used as a timing cue. A synchronization marker. Her stomach dropped. This was real. Every terrible instinct had been right. Ahead, brake lights suddenly flared bright red across the wet pavement. The SUV slowed sharply near the center span of the bridge. And through sheets of rain and flashing reflections, Emily saw a large delivery truck begin turning sideways across the roadway ahead. Everything happened too quietly. That was what terrified Emily most. No screaming tires. No explosion. No dramatic chaos like movies love to show. Just rain. Red brake lights reflecting across wet steel. And a delivery truck slowly turning sideways ahead of the bridge lane until the black SUV had nowhere left to go. Emily slammed her foot on the brake as her Honda skidded slightly across the slick pavement. Her heartbeat roared inside her ears. The second sedan accelerated immediately behind the SUV, boxing it in with terrifying precision. Professional containment. The truck stopped completely across both lanes. Water streamed down its white cargo doors while the storm swallowed the city skyline behind it. Emily grabbed her phone again. 911. This is an active threat now, she said sharply into the speaker. Queensboro Bridge lower span. Black SUV, trapped between vehicles. Units are en route, ma'am. They do not have time. Her eyes locked forward. The rear passenger door of the second sedan opened slowly. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark overcoat despite the heavy rain. Calm movements. No panic. No hesitation. Emily's stomach dropped. She knew that walk too. Controlled. Efficient. Someone trained to keep emotions disconnected from outcomes. The man approached the SUV carrying what looked like a flashlight. Nathaniel's driver lowered the window slightly. Emily could not hear the conversation through the storm, but she saw confusion in the driver's body language immediately. Wrong response. Too relaxed. The fake security team had not revealed themselves yet. They were still pretending this was assistance. Emily's hands trembled violently around the steering wheel. Call again. Wait for police. Stay inside the car. Every logical thought told her not to get involved directly. But then Sophie's face appeared briefly through the SUV window. The child looked nervous now. Claire leaned toward her protectively. And suddenly Emily was no longer seeing Manhattan. She was back in Istanbul 6 years earlier. Rain on concrete rooftops. Headphones pressed against her ears. Daniel laughing quietly before the operation began, because he always laughed when he was scared. Then silence. Then one delayed decision that changed everything forever. Emily shut her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them again, she had already made her choice. "Stay on the line, ma'am," the dispatcher said urgently. Emily threw the phone onto the passenger seat and shoved open her car door into the storm. Wind nearly knocked her sideways immediately. Rain soaked through her coat within seconds as she sprinted toward the trapped SUV. The man near the driver's window turned sharply at the sound of approaching footsteps. His expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Calculation. Emily pointed desperately toward the truck ahead. "The bridge support lane is collapsing behind you." She shouted toward the SUV loud enough for Nathaniel to hear through the cracked window. "You need to move now." It was a lie, but panic bought seconds. Nathaniel looked startled as the rear window lowered halfway. "You?" he shouted through the rain. Emily moved closer quickly. "Do not stay boxed in. Reverse now." Nathaniel frowned hard, trying to process the situation. "What are you doing here?" The tall man beside the SUV stepped forward calmly. "Sir, please remain inside the vehicle." Russian accent, barely noticeable to untrained ears. Emily felt cold certainty settle deeper into her bones. Nathaniel noticed it too this time. Just enough confusion flickered across his face for Emily to see it. The fake guard reached slowly toward the rear passenger door handle. Emily reacted instantly. "Sophie," she shouted sharply through the window, "lock your door right now." The little girl froze before immediately pressing the lock button beside her seat. The man's expression darkened for the first time. Nathaniel stared between them now, instincts finally waking beneath his disbelief. Claire pulled Sophie closer protectively. "Nathaniel," she whispered nervously. Emily stepped backward slightly, scanning the bridge. No police lights yet. No traffic. Only rain hammering against steel beams overhead. Then she saw movement near the truck. Another figure stepping out from the driver's side, carrying something metallic beneath his coat. Her pulse exploded. "Move the vehicle," Emily said firmly. "Now." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. He was a man used to commanding situations, not losing control of them. But years of business had also taught him how to recognize fear in other people. And Emily was not acting irrational. She was acting certain. The fake guard suddenly smiled again. "Calm. Empty." "Sir," he said softly to Nathaniel, "please stay inside. We will handle this." Emily saw Nathaniel's attention shift instantly toward the man's gloves. Leather tactical stitching exposed slightly beneath the rain. Tiny details. Tiny mistakes. The billionaire's expression changed. Not fully understanding yet, but enough. "Reverse the car," Nathaniel ordered his driver quietly. The driver hesitated. Wrong hesitation. Emily saw Nathaniel notice that too. Everything slowed after that. Claire clutching Sophie tighter. Rain streaking down dark windows. The distant growl of thunder above the river. And Nathaniel Brooks finally realizing the danger had been sitting beside him all night. The driver's hand moved slowly toward the center console instead of the gear shift. Emily's blood turned ice cold. "Nathaniel," she shouted, "get your family out of the car." For one frozen second, nobody moved. Rain hammered across the bridge hard enough to blur the city lights into streaks of silver and gold behind them. Nathaniel stared at his driver. The driver stared forward without blinking. And Emily felt the entire night balancing on a single decision. Then Sophie began crying softly in the back seat. The sound shattered the paralysis instantly. Claire reached for the door handle beside her. "Nathaniel," she whispered urgently. Nathaniel reacted at last. "Everybody out," he ordered sharply. The driver turned too quickly. "Sir, it is safer inside the vehicle." Wrong answer. Nathaniel's eyes hardened immediately. Men like him survive billion-dollar negotiations because they recognized tiny shifts in tone. Tiny fractures beneath polished behavior. And now he finally heard one. Fear. Not for his family. For the plan falling apart. Nathaniel shoved open his door into the storm and stepped onto the slick pavement. "Claire, take Sophie." Emily moved fast toward the rear passenger side as Claire struggled with the locked child safety system. Sophie's frightened face appeared through the rain-covered glass. "It is okay," Emily said softly, forcing calm into her voice. "Look at me, sweetheart. You are okay." Sophie nodded shakily while Emily pulled the handle again. Locked. Nathaniel rounded the rear of the SUV, water pouring from his coat sleeves. "Unlock the doors," he barked toward the driver. The driver did not move. Instead, His hand disappeared lower beside the console. Emily's stomach tightened instantly. "Nathaniel," she snapped sharply. "Do not let him touch anything." The fake guard near the vehicle stepped forward again. "Sir, everyone needs to remain calm." Emily saw it happen before Nathaniel did. The second man near the truck was approaching now through the rain with controlled, deliberate steps. No panic. No confusion. This operation was supposed to end quietly. Efficiently. Emily grabbed Nathaniel's sleeve hard enough to shock him. "Get Claire away from the car." Nathaniel looked directly into her eyes for the first time that night. Not at her uniform. Not dismissively. Actually looking. And whatever he saw there finally erased the last of his doubt. "Claire," he shouted immediately. "Move." Claire pulled back, just as the SUV interior lights flickered strangely once. Emily's blood ran cold. Too familiar. Daniel's voice echoed through her memory again. "If electronics fail first, leave the vehicle immediately." Nathaniel stepped backward fast now, instincts fully awake. "Sophie is still inside," Claire cried. Emily lunged toward the rear door again and slammed her palm against the glass. "Sophie, crawl over the seat." The child was crying harder now, but obeyed instantly, climbing clumsily across the back row. Emily glanced once toward the approaching men. Distance closing. Seconds disappearing. She reached beneath the rear wheel well blindly. Most armored luxury SUVs carried emergency mechanical overrides there for security extraction situations. Her fingers found a hidden latch beneath the frame. Thank God. She yanked hard. The rear passenger lock clicked open. Emily ripped the door wide just as Sophie threw herself toward Claire. Nathaniel grabbed both of them immediately, pulling them away from the vehicle through the rain. "Move toward my car," Emily shouted. "Now." The first fake guard's calm expression finally vanished. "Stop them." His voice cut sharply through the storm. Everything accelerated after that. The second man broke into a sprint from near the truck. Nathaniel shoved Claire and Sophie behind a steel maintenance barrier beside the bridge walkway, while Emily positioned herself between them and the SUV instinctively. She hated how natural it still felt. Nathaniel stared at her in disbelief. "Who are you?" Rain streamed down Emily's face as she scanned every angle around them. "Not now." The driver suddenly stepped out of the SUV at last. His face looked strangely emotionless beneath the bridge lights. Nathaniel's voice turned deadly calm. "You worked for me for 11 months. The driver said nothing. Claire clutched Sophie tightly beneath the barrier while thunder cracked overhead. Emily spotted flashing red and blue lights far behind them, finally entering the bridge access road. Too far away. The fake guard saw them too. One exchanged a quick glance with the other. Decision made. Abort. The tall man, near Emily, stepped backward slowly toward the second sedan. Professional retreat. Controlled. Nathaniel moved protectively in front of Claire and Sophie immediately. Every inch of his billionaire confidence gone now, replaced by something far more human. Fear. Emily recognized it because she had seen it in mirrors before. The second man disappeared back toward the truck while the driver retreated silently toward the sedan. Within seconds, engines roared through the rain. The truck pulled away first. Then the sedan vanished into the storm behind it. Gone almost as quietly as they arrived. Silence settled across the bridge except for rain and Sophie's soft crying. Emily's chest rose and fell painfully as adrenaline drained from her body all at once. Police sirens echoed closer now. Nathaniel turned slowly toward her. Water dripped from his dark hair across a face that no longer looked controlled or untouchable. Just shaken. Human. Alive. Sophie suddenly slipped from Claire's arms and walked directly toward Emily. The little girl's white coat fluttered in the storm wind as she stopped beside her quietly. Then, without saying a word, Sophie wrapped her small arms around Emily's waist. Emily froze completely. For a second, the bridge disappeared. The storm disappeared. Everything disappeared except the memory of another child years ago reaching for safety too late. Her hands trembled softly as she looked down at Sophie. Nathaniel watched the scene in silence. And somewhere deep beneath the rain, beneath the fear, beneath the shock of how close his family had come to vanishing into the night, something inside him began to break open for the very first time. Blue and red police lights flashed across the rain-soaked bridge like broken reflections from another world. Officers rushed toward the abandoned SUV while paramedics guided Claire and Sophie beneath thermal blankets near the patrol cars. The storm had not slowed at all. Wind screamed between the steel beams overhead, carrying the sharp smell of wet concrete and river water through the night air. Emily stood several feet away near the guardrail, arms folded tightly against the cold. Her soaked waitress uniform clung to her sleeves beneath her coat, but she barely noticed anymore. Adrenaline still moved through her body in violent waves. One officer approached her holding a notepad. "Miss Carter," Emily nodded once. "We need a statement." She glanced automatically toward the bridge entrance where officers were examining the abandoned SUV. "The men are already gone. We still need details." Emily hesitated. Years ago, she could have described every face, every movement, every tactical error those men made within seconds. Tonight, though, exhaustion sat heavy behind her eyes. She gave only the essentials. 2 men, Russian accents, suspicious behavior, possible impersonation of executive security personnel. Nothing about Istanbul, nothing about training, nothing about the old life she buried under restaurant shifts and silence. The officer scribbled quickly before looking up again. "You followed them alone?" Emily gave a small nod. His expression shifted somewhere between disbelief and admiration. "That was risky." Emily looked out toward the dark river below. "I know." Behind her, Nathaniel stood speaking sharply into a phone while 2 detectives listened nearby. His wet charcoal coat hung open now, tie loosened, dark hair damp against his forehead. For the first time since Emily met him, he no longer looked untouchable. Billionaires usually carried invisible walls around themselves. Layers of money, security, distance. But fear had cracked those walls tonight. And standing beneath flashing police lights with rain running down his face, Nathaniel Brooks looked less like a powerful CEO and more like a father realizing how close he had come to losing everything. Sophie sat inside the ambulance with Claire, wrapped in a gray blanket while paramedics checked her pulse and temperature. Every few seconds, the little girl looked back toward Emily through the open ambulance doors as if making sure she was still there. Emily felt something painful tighten quietly in her chest. "Miss Carter." Nathaniel's voice came from behind her. She turned slowly. Up close, his eyes looked different now. Softer somehow. More honest. He held out a dry wool coat one of the officers must have given him. "You are freezing." Emily shook her head immediately. "I am fine." "You are shaking." She looked down at her trembling hands as if noticing them for the first time. Nathaniel stepped closer and draped the coat gently across her shoulders before she could protest again. The warmth startled her. Not because of the fabric, because powerful men rarely handled ordinary people gently, especially not men like Nathaniel Brooks. Emily lowered her eyes. "Thank you." Rain drummed against the ambulance roof nearby. Nathaniel studied her quietly for several seconds before speaking again. "Who taught you to recognize them?" Emily's fingers tightened slightly around the borrowed coat. There it was. The question she knew would eventually come. Not "who are you" anymore. Worse, "who are you?" Emily stared toward the bridge lights instead of answering immediately. Sometimes life teaches people strange things. Nathaniel did not smile. That was not instinct tonight. She remained silent. He stepped beside her at the guardrail, both of them watching police officers photograph the abandoned vehicles through sheets of rain. "My driver worked for my company almost a year," Nathaniel said quietly. "Background checks, references, federal clearance." His jaw tightened. "I trusted him around my daughter." Emily looked at him carefully now. The anger in his voice was not directed outward. It was aimed inward. Guilt. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "And I dismissed the only person who tried to warn me." Emily shook her head gently. "Most people would have. Not anymore." The answer came quickly. Honestly, Emily did not know what to say to that. A paramedic approached, carrying Sophie's sketchbook inside a clear plastic evidence bag. "This belongs to the child," he explained. Nathaniel took it automatically, then paused as a folded piece of paper slipped loose inside the bag. Sophie's drawing. Rain had smeared parts of the pencil sketch, but Emily could still make out 3 figures standing beside a restaurant window beneath falling rain. A man, a little girl, and a woman with dark hair holding a coffee pot. Nathaniel stared at the drawing silently. "She drew this during dinner," he said quietly. Emily felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Nathaniel looked up from the paper toward her again. "She remembered you before any of this started." Across the bridge, sirens faded farther into the distance as additional units searched surrounding streets. But Emily already knew they would not find those men tonight. Professionals disappeared long before panic arrived. That was the part ordinary people never understood. The dangerous ones rarely looked dangerous until it was too late. Nathaniel folded the drawing carefully and handed it back to the paramedic. I want a full private security sweep on every property I own by sunrise, he told one of his assistants approaching nearby. Then he looked back toward Emily. And I want to know how a waitress saved my family when an entire security team failed. Emily's face lowered slightly. The rain softened at last around them, becoming quieter now, almost gentle. Because security teams protect money, she said softly. People who have lost someone protect people. Nathaniel stared at her without speaking. And for the second time that night, silence settled between them, not from distrust, but understanding. By 2:30 in the morning, the storm had finally begun to weaken over Manhattan. Rain still fell steadily across the city, but the violent wind was gone now, leaving behind streets that shimmered beneath reflections of traffic lights and skyscraper windows. Emily sat alone near the back corner of Bellevue Hospital's emergency waiting area, wrapped in the wool coat Nathaniel had given her earlier. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly. Nurses moved through the halls with quiet footsteps while televisions mounted near the ceiling played muted late-night news no one was watching. Emily stared down at the paper cup of coffee cooling between her hands. She had not touched it in 20 minutes. Exhaustion pressed heavily behind her eyes now that the adrenaline had faded. Her muscles ached. Her throat felt raw from rain and cold air. But none of that compared to the familiar weight returning slowly to her chest. The memories always came after silence. Daniel smiling across a surveillance van. Istanbul rain against cracked windows. One delayed decision. One wrong assumption that there would still be time later. Emily closed her eyes briefly. You have not slept, have you? Nathaniel's voice interrupted softly beside her. She opened her eyes immediately. He stood near the waiting room doorway holding 2 fresh cups of coffee from the vending machine downstairs. His dress shirt sleeves were rolled halfway up now, tie completely gone, dark circles visible beneath his eyes. He looked nothing like the billionaire from dinner. He looked like a father who had spent the night sitting beside hospital beds trying to understand how life almost changed forever in less than 10 minutes. Emily straightened slightly. How is Sophie? Nathaniel handed her one of the coffees before sitting carefully across from her. The doctors say she is fine. His voice lowered. Claire finally got her to sleep about 30 minutes ago. Emily nodded quietly. Relief moved gently through her chest. Nathaniel studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. You knew exactly where to find the emergency lock release on the SUV. Emily looked down at the steam rising between her hands. Most armored executive vehicles use similar designs. That is not common knowledge. Silence settled between them again. Outside the hospital windows, rain slid slowly down the glass, while ambulance lights flashed faintly against wet pavement below. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. Emily. The way he said her name sounded different now. Careful. Respectful. Those men tonight were not random criminals. She remained quiet. One of the detectives recognized the operation style immediately, Nathaniel continued. Corporate extraction teams. High-level organized groups. People trained to disappear wealthy targets without public attention. Emily's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. Yes. Nathaniel watched her carefully. And somehow a waitress working double shifts in Manhattan recognized them before my entire security division did. Emily gave the faintest smile, though sadness lingered beneath it. Sometimes people spend so long trying to survive danger that they never stop seeing it. Nathaniel lowered his eyes briefly before speaking again. You said earlier that people who lose someone protect people differently. Emily's heartbeat slowed painfully. There it was again. The edge of the truth waiting beneath every conversation tonight. Nathaniel's voice softened further. Who did you lose? The waiting room suddenly felt too quiet. Too bright. Emily stared toward the rain outside, instead of answering immediately. For years she had avoided this exact moment. Questions led to explanations. Explanations led to names. Names led back toward the life she escaped. But Nathaniel had a right to understand why his daughter was sleeping safely tonight. Emily inhaled slowly. My younger brother. Nathaniel remained silent, listening fully now. His name was Daniel. Emily's voice stayed calm, but her hands trembled slightly around the cup. We worked together overseas a long time ago. Nathaniel frowned faintly. Military. Something close to it. She swallowed carefully. We monitored trafficking networks moving through Eastern Europe and Turkey. Languages. Surveillance. Intelligence analysis. Nathaniel stared at her without blinking now. Emily continued quietly. One night, we intercepted communications about a transfer operation involving children. I noticed inconsistencies in the timing patterns. Her voice thinned slightly, but I hesitated. The hospital sounds around them faded into distant noise. I thought we still had time to confirm before moving. Nathaniel's expression softened slowly. Emily lowered her eyes. We were wrong. Silence stretched gently between them. Not uncomfortable. Heavy. Human. Nathaniel leaned back slightly, processing everything. That is why you reacted tonight. Emily nodded once. The music in the cars. The language patterns. The coordinated spacing. I recognized all of it. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. And I could not watch another family disappear while pretending I saw nothing. Nathaniel looked down at his untouched coffee for several seconds before speaking again. I built an entire empire teaching myself never to trust emotion over logic. He gave a quiet, humorless laugh. Tonight, emotions saved my family before logic even understood there was danger. Emily studied him carefully. The arrogance she noticed at the restaurant was gone now, stripped away by fear, gratitude, and the terrifying realization that money could not shield the people he loved from everything. Nathaniel finally looked back up at her. You know what scares me most? Emily shook her head gently. Sophie trusted you immediately. His voice cracked slightly beneath the exhaustion. Children usually know who feels safe before adults do. Emily felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Down the hallway, a nurse passed carrying blankets while soft instrumental music played faintly from a nearby television commercial. Nathaniel stood slowly, then removed a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. Sophie's rain-smudged drawing. He placed it carefully beside Emily's coffee cup. She asked me to give this to you when she wakes up. Emily stared down at the drawing silently. 3 figures standing beneath falling rain. And for the first time in years, the part of her that had lived buried beneath silence and guilt felt something unfamiliar begin returning quietly to life. Morning arrived slowly over Manhattan beneath pale gray clouds and streets still wet from the storm. By 8 o'clock, the city had already returned to its usual rhythm. Taxis filled intersections. Coffee carts released steam into the cold air. Businessmen hurried beneath umbrellas while headlines about market trends and celebrity scandals flashed across giant screens in Times Square. The world kept moving as if nothing had happened on the bridge only a few hours earlier. But inside a private hospital room on the 12th floor of Bellevue, time felt strangely softer. Quieter. Sophie sat cross-legged near the window wearing oversized hospital socks and drawing carefully inside a fresh sketchbook one of the nurses had brought her before sunrise. Claire rested nearby in a chair, exhaustion visible beneath her eyes despite the calm expression she tried to maintain for her daughter. Nathaniel stood beside the window with his phone pressed against his ear while sunlight struggled weakly through the rain-streaked glass behind him. I want every member of my security division rescreened immediately, he said coldly into the phone, including internal hires from the last 2 years. Silence. Then his jaw tightened. I do not care how much it costs. He ended the call sharply and stared out across the skyline for several seconds without speaking. Claire watched him carefully. You have not stopped working since 4 this morning. Nathaniel gave a tired smile that never fully reached his eyes. If I stop thinking about logistics, I start thinking about what almost happened. The room fell quiet again. Sophie looked up from her drawing suddenly. Where is Emily? Nathaniel turned toward his daughter. She went home to rest. Sophie frowned softly. Did she leave because she thinks we are scared of her? Claire blinked in surprise. Why would you think that? Sophie lowered her pencil carefully. Because people leave when they think they scared somebody. Nathaniel looked down briefly. Children heard truths adults missed all the time. He walked toward the hospital bed and sat beside her gently. Emily did not scare us, he said quietly. She protected us. Sophie nodded once as if that answer mattered deeply. Then she should not be alone today. Nathaniel felt something tighten painfully in his chest. Across the room, Claire watched both of them with a softer expression now. The tension that had quietly existed between her and Nathaniel for years seemed smaller this morning somehow. Fragile things had a way of reminding people what truly mattered. Meanwhile, 12 blocks downtown, Emily stood inside her tiny apartment kitchen staring blankly at untouched toast beside the sink. The apartment was silent except for rain dripping faintly outside the fire escape. Her waitress uniform hung drying near the radiator, while Sophie's folded drawing rested carefully on the small wooden table beside her coffee mug. Emily had slept less than 40 minutes. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bridge again. The truck. The fake guards. Nathaniel finally believing her 1 second before it became too late. Her phone buzzed softly against the counter. Unknown number. Emily hesitated before answering. Hello. Miss Carter. Nathaniel's voice carried through the phone quieter than usual. Tired. Human. Emily leaned lightly against the counter. How is Sophie? Already asking difficult questions. A faint smile touched Emily's face for the first time all morning. Silence followed briefly before Nathaniel spoke again. I owe you an apology. Emily closed her eyes softly. You do not owe me anything. I dismissed you because of your uniform. His honesty surprised her. I looked at you and saw a waitress instead of a person trying to help my family. Emily stared down at the steam rising from her coffee cup. Most people do. Nathaniel inhaled slowly on the other end of the line. That might be the saddest sentence I have heard in years. Emily did not know how to answer that. Outside her apartment window, sunlight finally pushed weakly through thinning clouds above the city. Nathaniel's voice softened further. Sophie wants to see you. Emily immediately shook her head, even though he could not see it. That is probably not a good idea. Why? The question came gently. Honestly, Emily moved toward the window slowly. Because eventually your security people will investigate me properly. Silence. And Emily looked down at the busy Manhattan street below. And people like me make powerful families nervous. Nathaniel's answer came without hesitation. People like you kept my daughter alive. Emily felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her throat. She swallowed carefully. Nathaniel, I spent years believing control and money could protect the people I loved. His voice lowered almost to a whisper. Last night a waitress with courage protected them instead. Emily leaned her forehead lightly against the cool glass window. For years she had lived quietly on purpose. Small apartment. Small life. No attachments. No attention. Safe. Invisible. But invisibility had a cost too. It slowly convinced people they no longer mattered. Nathaniel spoke again before she could answer. Would you at least come by the hospital for 10 minutes? Emily hesitated. Then her eyes drifted towards Sophie's rain-smudged drawing on the kitchen table. 3 figures standing together beneath falling rain. Something fragile moved quietly inside her chest again. Something she thought disappeared years ago beside Daniel. Belonging. 10 minutes, she said softly. Nathaniel exhaled what sounded almost like relief. Thank you. After the call ended, Emily remained beside the window for several seconds watching the city wake fully beneath fading storm clouds. Then slowly, almost cautiously, she reached for her coat hanging near the door. And for the first time in years, Emily Carter stepped back toward the world instead of hiding from it. 3 weeks later, Manhattan glittered beneath the gold light of early evening as crowds filled sidewalks with the restless energy of winter approaching. The storm from that night had long disappeared from the news cycle. New scandals replaced old fears. Markets rose and fell. Television anchors moved on. But some moments refused to disappear quietly. Emily Carter stood behind the coffee station at the Loron Hotel, adjusting ceramic cups beneath warm chandelier light, while soft piano music drifted once again across the dining room. Everything looked exactly the same as before. White tablecloths. Expensive watches. Waiters moving carefully between conversations worth more money than most people earned in years. Yet somehow nothing felt the same anymore. Emily moved differently now. Still quiet. Still observant. But no longer invisible to herself. Richard stepped beside her carrying menus. You have a reservation request tonight. Emily looked up in confusion. For me? Richard grinned faintly. Apparently billionaires do not stop calling once their children decide you are family. Emily sighed softly while reaching for the coffee pot. Richard, relax. He lowered his voice. He booked the small dining room upstairs. Private dinner. Nothing weird. Emily gave him a look. Richard raised both hands defensively before walking away, laughing under his breath. Emily shook her head gently and returned to polishing glasses, though nervousness moved quietly through her chest now. Since the bridge incident, Nathaniel had called several times. Never aggressively. Never trying to buy gratitude or force connection. Sometimes he only asked how her shift was going. Sometimes Sophie wanted to tell her about school drawings or piano lessons over speakerphone. Claire even thanked Emily personally during a short visit to the restaurant days earlier. It all felt strangely normal in a way Emily had forgotten life could feel. At exactly 7:15, the elevator doors near the dining room opened softly. Nathaniel stepped out first wearing a dark navy coat instead of his usual intimidating designer suits. Sophie followed beside him carrying something carefully wrapped in tissue paper, while Claire walked behind them, smiling faintly. No security team. No assistants. No invisible wall surrounding them anymore. Emily felt herself pause automatically. Sophie spotted her immediately. Emily. The little girl ran forward before Nathaniel could remind her not to run inside the restaurant. Emily laughed softly as Sophie wrapped her arms around her waist again, just like she had on the bridge. Hi, sweetheart. Sophie looked up proudly. I brought you something. Nathaniel approached slower, his gray eyes warm beneath the restaurant lights now instead of cold and guarded. I hope we are not interrupting your shift. Emily glanced toward Richard across the dining room. Her manager immediately disappeared into the kitchen, pretending not to watch them. She smiled faintly. I think I can take a short break. Upstairs, the private dining room overlooked rain-speckled Manhattan windows glowing with evening traffic far below. Candles flickered softly between untouched coffee cups, while piano music drifted faintly from downstairs through the walls. Sophie sat beside Emily immediately while Claire ordered tea for everyone. Nathaniel remained quiet for the first few minutes, simply watching the room with the expression of a man trying to memorize peace after nearly losing it forever. Then Sophie pushed the tissue paper package toward Emily carefully. Open it. Emily unfolded the paper slowly. Inside rested a small silver keychain shaped like a compass. Tiny words engraved beneath it caught the candlelight softly. For people who help others find their way. Emily stared at the gift silently for several seconds. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Sophie, Daddy said heroes usually get trophies, Sophie explained seriously. But I thought maybe heroes get lost sometimes too. Claire lowered her eyes quickly while Nathaniel stared quietly into his coffee. Emily smiled through sudden tears she had not expected. It is beautiful. Sophie beamed proudly. Dinner passed softly after that. No dramatic conversations. No business deals. Just small human things. Claire talking about Sophie's piano recital next month. Sophie asking Emily if she ever wanted a dog. Nathaniel quietly listening more than speaking for once in his life. And slowly, Emily realized something almost frightening. She felt safe here. Truly safe. Later, as Claire and Sophie stepped downstairs briefly to look at desserts, silence settled gently between Emily and Nathaniel beside the window overlooking Manhattan. Rain tapped lightly against the glass again tonight. Softer than before. Nathaniel studied the city lights below before speaking quietly. My entire life, I believed strength meant control. Emily leaned lightly against the window beside him. Most powerful people do. He smiled faintly. Then a waitress ignored every reason to stay silent and changed everything I thought I understood about courage. Emily looked down at the silver compass resting in her hands. I was terrified that night. I know. Nathaniel's voice softened further. Real courage usually is. She glanced toward him carefully. Gone was the billionaire who once dismissed her warning because of her uniform. In his place stood a man humbled by fear, gratitude, and the terrifying beauty of second chances. Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket slowly and placed a small envelope beside her coffee cup. Emily frowned slightly. What is this? Not a job offer, he said immediately with a quiet smile. And not money. Emily opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single folded document. Scholarship endowment papers. Daniel Carter International Language Fellowship. Emily's breath caught painfully. Nathaniel looked out toward the rain beyond the windows. You said your brother spent his life helping protect vulnerable people before the world forgot his name. His voice remained calm. Respectful. I thought maybe his name deserved to keep protecting people. Emily could not speak. Outside, headlights shimmered across wet Manhattan streets while rain fell softly against the glass. And for the first time in years, Emily Carter no longer felt like someone hiding from the world. Because sometimes the quietest people are not invisible at all. Sometimes they are simply waiting for one moment brave enough to remind them who they truly are.